Ignition, and it has cleared the tower.
It was, as NASA says, a nominal liftoff. It was a brief voyage for the Challenger. It was a heart-stopping tragedy.
This is Eyewitness News with Roger Grimsby, Bill Butel, plus Storm Field, Spencer Christian, and the Eyewitness News team.
Good evening, I'm Roger Grimsby. Here now the news. In the course of the U.S. effort to explore and work in space, there's never been anything like what happened today. The shuttle exploding, science were watching, children were watching, and all aboard, including a school teacher, were killed.
It started well. A beautiful day, clear sky, the calm, reassuring voice of mission control. At 11:37, after 3 scrubbed attempts, after a frigid blast of air had frozen the Cape, Challenger achieved liftoff. Among the hundreds of spectators this morning in Florida, the parents of Christa McAuliffe, as well as husband Stephen and their 2 children. But on this 25th shuttle mission, man's 56th journey into space, the applause, the sighs of relief at takeoff were sadly premature.
Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go.
Less than 2 minutes after liftoff, the rocket speeding the shuttle at 2,000 miles an hour exploded. On the ground, spectators not certain of what they saw, and the understated explanation from NASA.
Obviously a major malfunction.
At first, there was hope a parachute falling from the debris was carrying all or some of the 7 men aboard. It wasn't. It was part of the Navy Air Sea Rescue Team. There is no escape hatch aboard this version of the shuttle. And later, space experts say no ejector seats or emergency evacuation capsule could have saved anyone from this disaster. Besides Christa McAuliffe, the crew was made up of some of NASA's most skilled and experienced astronauts. Dick Scobie, the shuttle commander, making his 2nd trip into space. Shuttle pilot Mike Smith was on his first shuttle flight. Ronald McNair had been up there before, as had Judy Resnick, one of NASA's specialists most knowledgeable on the shuttle's maneuvering arm. Also killed, crew members Ellison Onizuka, a mission specialist, Greg Jarvis, a payload specialist, and of course, the civilian Christa McAuliffe, whose participation in this mission made her the most famous member of the shuttle crew. Except for Judy Resnick, all the crew members were married and all had children.
To reconstruct what seems to have happened, let's begin with this frame of the videotape about a minute after liftoff. Everything looks normal. The shuttle on the bottom of the liquid fuel booster having turned over as is normal. The solid fuel boosters still operating normally so far as we can tell. In this frame, a second or so after the first, you see the beginnings of the flame, not far below the nose of the spacecraft itself, the shuttle itself. And in this next frame, the flame seems, if you look very closely, to have begun to spread. And then the last frame shows the explosion itself. Explosion and fire that took the lives of 7 people this morning, the worst tragedy ever to affect the American space and shuttle programs. That's what it looked like, but why did it happen? We waited all afternoon for an often postponed news conference from officials at NASA at Cape Canaveral. And what we got added little to our knowledge of the details of this tragedy.
All early indications in the Launch Control Center, the Kennedy Space Center, have indicated that the launch was normal up to approximately 11:40 a.m. this morning, about a minute or so into the flight. Flight controllers in the Launch Control Center here and in the Mission Control Center in Houston were polled immediately after the explosion, reported that they did not see anything unusual up to that point. The media is showing footage of the launch today from the NASA Select system. We will not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion based on that footage.
But others were speculating, closely examining the videotapes of the spectacular explosion. Was the explosion set off in the solid fuel boosters that straddle the main liquid fuel boosters at the center of the craft? Probably not. Those solid boosters on the side are seen later intact, jettisoned away from the craft. Did the fire start inside the shuttlecraft itself and then jump over to the very volatile liquid fuel central booster? Possible. But as the afternoon wore on, another theory began to gain credibility, that the explosion was caused by the solid fuel boosters breaking away too soon. The bolts may be puncturing the liquid fuel boosters and setting off the explosion.
The liquid fuel tank ignited prematurely. There was a little bit of fuel going into the 3 main rocket engines of the orbiter, but most of the fuel in the liquid fuel tank was still there. And evidently it ignited prematurely, perhaps due to the fact that one of the main solid fuel rockets detached prematurely. There's a little explosion when it blows off. It may have detached prematurely and ruptured the main fuel tank.
The incident now also raises questions about the preparations for the launch and the viability of the craft. The Challenger, which had experienced problems in a launch last July, which had gone through a quick turnaround since the last trouble-plagued flight, which had endured some last-minute safety hitches before this flight. NASA defends its priorities.
We have always maintained that flight safety is our top priority consideration in the program, and we look at the status and readiness of the systems based on that.
But as for now, the investigation begins. NASA is impounding all data and information about the launch and about the explosion, all the information and data that can be found, any fragments of spacecraft that could lead them to an answer. And all the while, the space program of this country is brought to a halt, probably for many months, according to those who know. Casualties of the crash, the accident, the tragedy, many space programs, including one to Halley's Comet. But most importantly, of course, the 7 men and women aboard Space Shuttle Challenger this morning.
President Reagan called the disaster at Cape Canaveral a national tragedy, expressed the country's sympathy to the families of the Challenger's 7 crew members, and he had this special message.
I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
Because of what happened today, the president has canceled his State of the Union message, which was scheduled for this evening. He will deliver it next week.
As you can tell from the content of this program, the catastrophe at Cape Canaveral overshadowed everything else that happened today. Katie Tong is here to tell us now what the disaster meant to one family in particular, the family of teacher astronaut Christa McAuliffe. Katie?
Thank you, Bill. The other Challenger crew members were resigned to the fact that this was to be remembered as the teacher mission. Christa was America's first civilian astronaut, and her family was extremely proud as they watched this morning's launch.
Altitude 4.3 nautical miles.
Christa's attorney husband and their 2 children were at Cape Canaveral. The kids, Scott, age 9, and Caroline, age 6. Scott brought members of his 3rd grade class from Concord, New Hampshire, who displayed a large Go Christa banner. They watched in stunned silence as the disaster occurred. Christa's parents were also in the crowd. They watched quietly as Challenger lifted off. Suddenly, confusion over what had happened. Then, a NASA official told them, quote, "The vehicle has exploded." Christa's mother kept repeating the statement as a question. "The vehicle has exploded?" Christa McAuliffe had been a teacher for 12 years. She left her classroom behind for a semester of space training and for a new kind of learning. Listen to her description of the airplane ride that simulates zero gravity.
As you peak that parabola at the top, you have about 20 or 30 seconds of weightlessness, and all of a sudden, just like Peter Pan, you start flying up, and it was just unbelievable.
That's the enthusiasm that's made her a favorite of students at Concord High School in New Hampshire. This is where the Boston-born social studies teacher lived with her husband and 2 children, and where she put together her lesson plans that emphasize practical experience as well as book learning.
You can take very complex concepts and simplify them but not water them down. And she makes all her students understand things, but in an interesting manner.
She was explaining like the assembly line process, and she went into this story about when she used to package Twinkies on the assembly line. And I mean, I just laughed so hard, but I'm not gonna forget it.
That's also what helped her application stand out among the 11,000 that NASA received, and what changed her life.
The teacher who will be going into space, Christa McAuliffe.
Suddenly, she was a celebrity. McAuliffe and her family were paraded along Main Street and featured on the front page. When she reported to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, she was poked and prodded, outfitted and observed.
She's a sort of a risk taker. She does the unusual, the way she runs a class, and she's not afraid of things. She lives life. She's not afraid of it.
You might wonder now why Christa wanted to go on the mission.
Well, it was a challenge, and it was something that I always ask my students, you know, to go and seek whatever they feel they can do and reach a little higher. The whole process was kind of exciting for me because I knew that there would be people from each state who would be coming together, and I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to talk with all these educators and exchange ideas, and that was really fun. And that's basically why I decided to send in that application, never dreaming that it would get this far.
Christa's 6 other crew members graded her well as she trained for their mission, and tonight, America mourns their loss. Bill?
Thank you, Katie. Christa McAuliffe, one of the 7. Eyewitness News will air a special report, the tragic flight of Challenger, at 7:30, immediately following the World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. We invite you to join Ernie Anastas and Katie Tong at 7:30 this evening for that special report on the tragedy that has occupied most of our attention, most of this country's attention, through most of this day. Roger?
I'm Roger Grimsby. Good night.
I'm Bill Butel. Thank you very much for being with us. Good luck and be well.